Hello, everyone. Welcome to our session. Today, we have with us Shabnam Virmani, a documentary filmmaker from India and initiator of the Kabir Project. And it has been close to 2 decades since Kabir Project has started. It has been like a transmedia project in which there have been many films, many events, a YouTube channel, a web archive, and it has been like preserving and interacting with the mystic traditions in India of both Sufi and Bhakti. And I think it is a very good example of a circulation about living together. Welcome, Shabnam, for being with us. And in the context of today in contemporary India, there has been a lot of circulation, divisive circulations, especially which creates like very sectarian identities, a constant reaffirmation of sectarian identities, and many circulations contribute to it, whether it's like WhatsApp misinformation or like riots, sectarian riots. So in such a context, Kabir Project is creating like a very positive circulation network. Can you talk a little bit about this and like how did you start it? What was the philosophy behind it? Thank you.
So actually the birth of this project took place in a time of extreme communal hatred and divisiveness that erupted in the state of Gujarat in the year 2002, where I was living at that time. And there were communal riots between Hindus and Muslims, and many Muslims were killed in the state at that time. And for me, as a secular activist leaning person who knew very little about the domains of religion and faith, it created a deep disquiet. The secular trope, if you will, fails to understand uh, Indian society, or why just Indian? I would say uh, it's a global situation where people are uh, mobilized or propelled into a lot of divisive hatred and pogroms based on identity, which is often linked with religion. So it's a global reality. And I feel to I felt very acutely at that point that to try and understand this from a purely secular sort of atheistic space was part of the problem. And I think that propelled me to try and understand when a figure like Kabir, who is a mystic poet, Kabir will question both Hindu pandits and Muslim qazis for their folly. What is he speaking about? Why is there the language of faith in a man who is equally deriding people of organized religion? So I wanted to understand that for myself, and that started this quest. And I think I truly feel that Kabir Project, along with uh, other expressions in the country today, are trying to create a third space. And it's important that more and more people inhabit this third space, which is a place that is not mistrustful of religion, not mistrustful of the spiritual quest, which I believe is part of a human condition. Uh, and from that space, critiques divisive deployments of religious identity.
So Shabnam, for creating that space, that third space, so you use many different elements over like almost 2 decades. In 2022, it will be 2 decades. It's not just one film. So can you please talk more about the creation of a space and how did you come to those different elements in that space?
Right. So I'm trained as a journalist and a filmmaker. So, really, my original impulse in this quest was to create a series of film travelogues. And we created four documentary travelogues. I don't know if you've had a chance to see the Hindi dubs, but people have told me that some of them feel the Hindi dubs come through better than the English subtitled films. Um, and that's because very clearly the work of the Kabir Project, uh, or I should say my work even as a filmmaker before the Kabir Project, when I was working on grassroots women's movements and social struggles with video and radio, our lens is much more on the community in working with these media. So sort of my orientation is really not the film festival circuit, and really the focus of our work is how is this work feeding back into these traditions that keep this poetry and uh, philosophic thought alive. And so it became a no-brainer. These films had to speak in Hindi. And the moment we created those Hindi dubbed films, the immediate next thing that came up was, how are we sharing this? How are we sharing this back in the countryside where we have documented all of this? So immediately emerged, quite organically, the idea of creating a rural yatra. Um, um, Prahlad Tipania ji, with whom I have collaborated very deeply, used to do an annual event in his village in Madhya Pradesh, which brought together a lot of thinkers, singers of Kabir, and a lot of rural people. So I suggested that we take that form and make it into a traveling yatra where many more singers from other spaces come, not just Madhya Pradesh, but neighboring states. And we screen these Hindi dubbed films and have generate conversations in the countryside. And also, not to ignore urban English speaking spaces or global spaces for that matter, but our work has therefore always had a very strong on the ground element and a virtual element, because soon after that came the idea to create an archive which would be available digitally. So both virtually and physically, from the village to other more urban contexts. The impulse was to curate and recirculate this poetry as a really powerful response, if you will, to the more right wing, narrow thinking around religion. Because you're not introducing an alien thought, you're actually regenerating something that is part of the local tradition. You're just rejigging it, if you will. You're translating it, you're curating it, you're juxtaposing it with other ideas that create interesting um, meanings when they come together. Uh, so from that came the thought of an archive. The idea of an archive came also because so many singers and rural people wanted access to the footage we had shot over so many years. And what better way to share it with them than virtually, because now everybody was on mobile phones and even in rural areas. Um, and Personally, I've been drawn into also writing books in the phase after that. I've written a book on a Sindhi Sufi poet, Shah Latif, and right now I'm hoping that my recent book will get published sometime in this year, which is on Kabir, which is in English. So really, it emerged quite very, very organically. And the yatras, and we did a very big festival of Kabir, kind of was an idea that was, I think, just waiting to happen and be picked up by many people. So then my colleague started the Rajasthan Kabir Yatra, which happens annually. Some friends started the Mumbai Festival of Kabir, which we supported in its first avatar, and then that became an annual event. So it and I feel that when an idea wants to travel, then it keeps moving and morphing. So it's just ripples that happened, and many people took ownership of the unfolding Kabir community grew through that.
Thank you. And also, like, the yatras or journey, especially in the Indian context, in contemporary India, it was used in a very divisive way. And I remember my experience in a recent Malwa Kabir Yatra. I remember sitting, and I've had the most civilized conversation I've ever had with a hardcore right-wing person, because we were like meeting each other. We were not on Facebook trying to unfriend each other or in a WhatsApp fight. So this embodied element is very central to Kabir Project, which works in sync with virtual spaces, and also the embodied element is also very central to Kabir's poetry and the mystics poetry. So how was, as an artist, how did you bring these two elements together, that space of embodiment as well as being virtual?
The answer to that, Fatima, really also lies in the fact that as a filmmaker, I felt the limit. I acutely felt the limitations of only documenting this poetry and not participating in it myself. So the impulse to drop the camera and pick up the tambura and start singing it myself is exactly what you are saying. There is an impulse to embody this poetry, and uh, in fact, I would like to share with you a very new idea and a very new vision, which is going to open up new channels of circulation of this poetry that I'm very excited about, which the genesis of which started in COVID, when we were devising ways of supporting folk singers whose livelihoods had taken a knock. Um, the idea emerged to create a kind of a movement where we could both offline and digitally bring folk singers and Kabir poetry and music into school classrooms across the country. Because I don't know if you know, if you've been educated in India, Kabir is taught in a textual way. There are 10 couplets of Kabir, the famous 10 couplets of Kabir, which are part of all school going children's Hindi textbooks. And they are taught in a very pedantic, moralistic manner. And I truly believe the best pedagogy for mystic thought is a song. And I'm saying this because you asked me this question about embodiment, right? As a filmmaker, how do you interact with the fact? And I'm saying both personally, there was this impulse towards embodiment. And my personal impulse towards embodiment reflected generations of people's celebrating this thought in embodied ways through song. For 600 years, Kabir's poetry has moved from body to body. And recognizing that that's actually the best pedagogy for keeping alive a poetry, a philosophic vision like this, which is non-sectarian and actually interrogates sectarian impulses. I'd like to tell you about a new film series that we are launching on October 3rd, which is called Ajab Mulaqatein. Ajab Mulaqatein translates as wondrous encounters or wondrous meetings. And we call it we call it a lockdown film series because it has been entirely shot, well, not entirely, but mostly shot during lockdown on Zoom. Okay. And Zoom is also quite a wondrous platform because Zoom created intimacies that I never thought were possible. So I was uh, disappointed the last 3 times I tried for a visa to physically go to Pakistan. It was denied to me. And I thought, oh my God, when will I get this chance to travel with this musician, Saif Samejo, who said, come, we'll go to the Dargah of Shah Latif in Bhit together and we will work together. And I thought, maybe this is not going to happen. And then lockdown happens. Saif and I get onto a Zoom conversation and he plays music and we have a long conversation that's short. Okay. And we have edited these Zoom conversations into these, I think, very charming lockdown films, even though which almost celebrate the ephemeral, pixelated nature of our fragile connections in this in this locked down time, people were still finding ways of reaching out and connecting with each other, all of them sitting in their homes. So uh, Seth speaks in this first film that we launch on October 3rd about a particular cluster of poems by Shah Latif called Sur Samundi, in which he speaks about women left home by their sailor husbands who, take the seas, and sometimes the rough ocean capsizes their boats and barges, and then they never come back. Okay, so that's the context. He uses it as a metaphor to speak about the yearning for that which is gone and is not coming back. So for Shah Latif, it's a kind of a meditation on the nature of loss and impermanence, and a sense of separation from some source. Sef Samejo reinterprets that poetry in the context of partition between India and Pakistan. And he says, that's how it speaks to me. Sitting here in Pakistan, and I think of all the people who left for India in that moment of partition and never came back. And it's very uh, profound and moving, and this impulse to remember the past in new ways, because the narrative of the past there is one of divisiveness, of hatred, of reifying and demonizing the other. And here he is reinterpreting this poetry as as an act of healing, as an act of being able to reach your arms across these borders that bewilder, and embrace a kind of sameness. So to me, that it's a very moving film, a very short film, 20 minutes. So yes, there are so many ways in which you can choose to remember not just the past, I would say, Fatima, but the present too. How are we choosing to look at the present unfolding around us right now? We can choose to focus on all the divisiveness and fan it, or we can actually ferret out the messages of love and solidarity and togetherness which also unfold, which unfortunately get no truck on the media.
What you were talking about, like the Pakistani singer using this song to talk about Indians who went. And it's very interesting what you said about what do you focus in the present, not just in the past. Because for many of us, or many young people, you look at your past with what is happening around us. And, and very often it becomes like, you can only respond to it in a negative way, which actually kind of increases the negativeness.
I truly believe there are twin poles in the human spirit, in the human self, and the twin poles are love and fear. We have both these impulses in us. There is the part of us that is sort of linked to our animal lineage, which is territorial, right? Which wants to piss on our territory, right? Like dogs do. There is that. I mean, if you look around you, that's what everybody's doing, pissing on their territory, different kinds. So, yes, we can choose to live our lives like that, or we can invoke that ability which humans have been endowed with, which is to look beyond territory, to look beyond pissing on it, and uh, to and it's a truly human potential, uh, which unfortunately is unmanifest or unrealized in most of us. The ability to look beyond territories and invoke a larger sense of self that's not cordoned off into narrow borders of me versus you. So yeah, we we I think that defines everything that we do in the Kabir Project, which is to doggedly ferret out this impulse and fan it, because it's there, it's around us, it's in the past. You can choose to focus on it, and sort of even with, in filming, I will say this about the act of filming, and especially documentary filmmaking. I believe that documentary filmmaking can play the role uh, of meeting people, speaking to them. We all have these negative and positive forces, destructive and creative forces, and we get pulled into these narrower forces and narrower aspects of ourselves. But I think filmmaking and editing can also show back to us our best selves, which are inspiring. And then we seek to live up to our own best selves, in a sense, you know?
So that talks of self as like an evolving process and not a set sense of uh,
Absolutely.
thing. And you were talking
Absolutely.
about the importance of communication spaces, which will talk more about love rather than fear, which you were talking about. And right now we have a lot of disinformation networks. Actually money is being put into all these disinformation networks, not just in India but across the world.
Yeah.
But there is
Yeah.
very less investment in positive kind of circulations. you know and,
Yes.
if you could talk about your journey, because sustaining something like this over 19 years is not easy. So how did you
Yes.
manage, and what kind of resources is needed to sustain a circulation like this?
Right, right. So I think I've been really, truly lucky and blessed by having found both grants support and institutional support to provide stability to work like this. And to begin with, the films and the CDs and the outreach we did with the initial set of books and CDs that we published along with these four films were supported by with a grant from the Ford Foundation, which we expended over 6 to 7 years. Also, we were supported by Azim Premji Foundation to start thinking about how to work with the education sector and schools.
Yeah.
And we did a series of experiments. They also supported the archive. So it's been a series of grants, but we've been housed at the Srishti Institute of Art, Design, and Technology. And it is the visionary, I would say, impulse of our director, Geeta Narayanan, who saw value in this idea and chose as an institution to back it. So in between grants activity, our team has been supported by the institution and continues to be housed here. And now, of course, Srishti is merged with Manipal University, so it's Srishti Manipal Institute of Art, Design, and Technology that where this work is housed.
And I think this kind of institutional support is probably very essential for any kind of future work, probably. Like there is
Absolutely,
for that.
absolutely.
Yeah. And then Shabnam, like your work is also bringing, like and it, for example, either Shah Latif's or Kabir's work or any of the mystic poets work, it's part of a living tradition. And those networks are already there, and your work kind of re-energizes it into a new community. But rather than building an audience, building a very participatory community. So I mean, how do you look at it as a filmmaker, not being an audience but more of a community, and what is the elements of creating such a kind of interaction?
As a filmmaker, so I have to say, Fatima, that really my uh, okay, let me tell you about a train conversation with Prahlad ji. We were on our way to Banaras, actually. He was going to sing there. He's a very renowned folk singer, for those who don't know Prahlad Tipania ji, from Madhya Pradesh. Uh, and he was talking about, I was asking him to explain to me a particular couplet of Kabir in which he speaks about river banks as being very defined. And he was saying, yeah, a riverbank was a metaphor for uh, mm, uh, naming and claiming a slice of those riverbanks as yours. And the moment you do that, you limit yourself. You create boundaries of all kinds, not just sectarian, religious, or caste wise, but also boundaries of self definition along the lines of art or media or profession or discipline. So he suddenly turns to me and he says, you are holding on to that camera. The camera is not holding on to you. So, And that stayed with me for a while, like what did he mean? I'm holding on to the camera is not holding on to me. And I think he was basically nudging me to recognize that even identities that we cling to professionally, I'm an academic, I'm a researcher, I'm a filmmaker, I'm a singer, are forms of self-limitation. And he was trying to describe a state of being sahaj, which is a very key philosophic term in Kabir and Buddhism for that matter. To be sahaj is to be in a state of spontaneous naturalness. You're connected with something that's very natural. It's not contrived and cerebral. It's tuning into something that's organic and therefore easy. It just emerges. So I think the idea of being a filmmaker dissolved for me a long time ago, and it dissolved for me almost even before I made the four Kabir films. Uh, and even though I have to say, after a whole decade, I'm editing a whole new series of films, which I spoke about right now, Ajab Mulaqatein, and I'm so enjoying the return to what is a very, very loved form of self-expression, which is these films. So it's not something I shed. I just dissolved it as being the only identity I want to have. So the move from being a filmmaker to beginning to do satsangs with students, shared spaces of communion with this poetry and song, and singing it myself, it just emerged organically and naturally. Because when you shed this identity, when you burn down that house, to use a Kabirian metaphor, new things arise. You have to empty yourself, no, for new stuff to manifest, that wants to manifest through you. So it just dissolved in a sense, and it was very unpremeditated. It was not thought through. It just emerged that I started singing. Then the yatras happened, and in a sense I was then doing some kind of cultural mobilizing at a social level. And then the archive emerged, and we were creating digital archives online, which required a whole different set of skills. And then I wrote two books, and I was wanting to taste how it feels to be a writer, just free of all paraphernalia, technology, fading batteries and fading lights. No problems. It's just you and your mind and your ability to express it through the written form. So that's what I'm saying, that I think I don't think it was a conscious problem for me at any point, that it was not about creating an audience for my films, but it was about seeking newer and newer ways of sharing the inspirations of this poetry.
And also, like, one of the things, of course, Kabir's poetry and many of these poets do is, like, speaking deep philosophy in an ordinary person's language, and even like an illiterate person can relate to it. For example,
Yes.
in our present day, it is always like, for the ordinary person, you have the news channel
Yes.
debates, which are like, reaches a very, very low, or a WhatsApp misinformation forward, which happens. So whereas this takes an ordinary person to another level. Can you talk of what can we learn from that past, where poets could talk to the tiller, on the soil, the person who's working, uh, also being able to think in a very deep level, even if you're illiterate? What can we learn from that in our times, when the discourse for the ordinary person is so limited, or there is this effort to limit that thinking?
I read a very interesting book the other day by David Abraham called Spell of the Sensuous, where he basically argues that indigenous communities, pre-literate communities, which you are signaling right now, uh, were um were held in a relationship with the sensuous, with the tactile world, with the natural world, and transacted with the body, the whole body-mind complex. And he argues that a very radical and dangerous, if you will, shift happened with the arrival of writing, reading and writing. And the human spirit replaced its tactile relationship with the natural world with a new kind of attraction, which was the spell of the written letter, you know. And it's a very interesting book. And I feel that the text, the written word has opened up so many possibilities, but it has also limited the human spirit in some ways. It has created a fracture, a disconnect with our tactile environment. Like, you go to Cubbon Park or any one of these beautiful gardens in Bangalore, and people are out on evening walks doing this. You know, there is a dangerous spell that is cast on us by the written word that disconnects us from a more holistic way of knowing and being in the world. And I believe these so-called illiterate people who understand, intuit, live Kabir's philosophy do so with far greater ease than do highly educated PhD writers, scholars of Kabir. And I think they get it in a way that many of us more super educated people don't. We complicate our lives. Um, so, and I think there's something here to do with this, the printed word versus something that is more ephemeral, that's a spoken utterance that arises and fades away. Um, that is more in tune with cycles of being and non-being, cycles of becoming and dissolving, cycles of movement between form and formlessness, which is what this philosophy is all about. So I feel uh, a highly educated cerebral mind has great trouble intuiting this wisdom.
But Shabnam, I also would like to argue that, for example, in your films, there is like, yeah, you engage with this sensuality and the affect, through the film, and sometimes, even the books through the written word can also give you that, and also like, the other way around in India, contemporary India right now, it's circulations of hate, which is the central affect is hate around you. That's the effect which is in circulation, and that's what you encounter in an everyday basis. Whereas, I can say for myself, I'm looking at like, right-wing WhatsApp circulations for my research, then I watch your films. It's very two different levels, so I'll be much more calmer, and it's a sense of love that you get from those films. So how do you create such effective spaces, so what, I mean, you're somebody who has been creating such spaces for over almost 2 decades. So, I mean, is there like a way of doing it, or which other people and other initiatives can learn from?
Yes, I mean, I hear you. What I said was not meant to create a kind of a simplistic opposition between the written word and the non-written universe, but it was a way to signal to us that that something, there is a mode of cognition that maybe the human civilization has lost touch with this overarching emphasis on the written word. And that's all I was trying to signal, and I think that's what David Abraham tries to do. um, and how do you do it? I mean, I don't know what to say really. Creating, it surely should be possible, and people are doing it, creating WhatsApp forwards that generate love. um, and WhatsApp is also a fairly diverse university, which is propagating all manner of messages, because I think that that impulse will not be quieted in the human spirit to reach out and connect with from a space of love. So I think it is happening. I don't know what more I can say to offer by way of how one can do it. Yeah.
And my last question is, any kind of transformation is probably like a very slow process, right? And we are always in search for a quick fixes. Our society has an issue, let's fix it, you know. Whereas any transformation, I mean, as an artist, you know, do you have any stories or anything of transformation of yourself or others, like, you know, how it's a slow process and the range of circulations you need to create a more transformative space?
Yeah, I mean, I feel that I have also been lucky in being able to sustain my engagement with this space for close to 2 decades. And in a sense, in that process, see in a more long term perspective the lives of people affected. Uh, but Fatima, I would say that it's a very mysterious process, this space of change, social change, human transformation. What we may keep trying to create formulas for it, put it in boxes and say, this works like this is going to change someone's heart or view or worldview. It's a mysterious process. And it's like Kabir says in one of his songs, Moko kahan dhoonde re bande. He says, खोजी होए तो तुरंत मिल जाऊं पल भर की तलाश में, right? So that if you are earnest enough in your seeking, in your yearning for that, you could discover something in a instant, and that instant could transform you. So you might say it was a moment of an instance, but there was probably a whole lifetime before that moment of seeking, of life experiences that brought you to that moment where a Kabir song struck your heart in a way that changed your life, you know? So, what will you say caused that change? Will you say the film caused the change, the song caused the change? What caused that change? There were so many causes and conditions that led that person up to that moment where something shifted in his or her heart and worldview. So, it's really mysterious and it's difficult to speak about in any reductive way, I would say.
But your work with the school and all shows that, you know, you do think it's going to be a transformative space, spending more time with the children, like, you know. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I should say that, these spaces are not without their own contradictions and complexities. Like many of the Kabir singers that we are working with are themselves BJP people, and not seeing necessarily that contradiction between espousing and singing the poetry of Kabir and supporting a right-wing political campaign in the country. So, I mean, who knows what works where? You keep doing something with the hope that people will. Not everybody agrees with me if I say I'm very, very transparent about my politics, but not everybody who loves Kabir agrees with me that a right wing politics is in contradiction with the philosophy of Kabir. So,
Yeah, that we see in your film also. I think Prahlad Tipaniaji has this whole, you know, fight with these Kabir Panthis in a particular section of the film. Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yes.
And Shabnam, as a last thing, if you can perform a small, you know, verse of Kabir, that'd be really great.
You didn't prepare me for that. You didn't warn me. I'm not even sure what I can sing. Okay. In this song, Kabir is making fun of. He's sort of mocking both the Hindu yogi and the Muslim Qazi. To the yogi, he's saying, "Why are you roaming about barefoot, wearing saffron robes? You think you'll meet your God that way?" And to the Muslim, he's asking, "Why do you holler so loud from atop your masjid, your call to prayer, your azan? Why do you need to be so loud?" So he's asking us to profess our faith quietly. I'll just sing a few lines from this. गुजरान गरीबी में साधु भाई मगरूरी क्यों करता गुजरान गरीबी में साधु भाई मगरूरी क्यों करता जोगी होकर जटा बढ़ावे नंगे पैर क्यों फिरता है रे भाई जोगी होकर जटा बढ़ावे नंगे पैर क्यों फिरता है रे भाई गठड़ी बांध सिर ऊपर धर ले यूं क्या मालिक गठड़ी बांध सिर ऊपर धर ले यूं का मालिक मिलता मुल्ला होकर बांग पुकारे क्या तेरा साहिब बहरा है रे भाई गुजरान गरीबी में साधु भाई मगरूरी क्यों करता and then he ends by asking us to connect with that which is common in you and in me that is one in you and in me जो तेरे घट में रहा जो मेरे घट में सबके घट में एक है रे भाई कहे कबीर सुनो भाई साधो हर जैसे को तैसा कहे कबीर सुनो भाई साधो हर जैसे को ऐसा कर गुजरान गरीबी में साधु भाई मगरूरी क्यों करता मगरूरी क्यों करता मगरूरी क्यों करता
Thanks a lot, Shabnam. That's fantastic. And really looking forward to your new initiative with the schools and the Kabir poetry. Thank you.